I never planned on exploring the ranger station. I was only there because my car had stalled 3 miles up the old forest road, the battery dead and cell signal as absent as the sun on that gray, mist-choked morning. I'd seen the building on maps before, a red dot labeled Ranger Outpost 17 on the edge of Thorne's Hollow National Forest, but I'd always assumed it had been torn down decades ago. Its roof sagged under the weight of rotting leaves, moss crawled up its walls, and every window was a dull, lifeless black. But with nowhere else to go, and night coming fast, I stepped inside, boots sinking into a carpet of mildew. The air was heavy with the scent of damp wood and something acrid, like rust and rot. Dust motes drifted in the weak light filtering through cracked slats in the boarded windows. The silence felt oppressive. Every floorboard creak echoed like a gunshot in the stale air. I moved slowly, past splintered desks littered with moldy papers and toppled filing cabinets, scanning for anything useful, blankets, a radio, maybe a first aid kit. That's when I noticed a stack of old charts in a cabinet barely held together by rusted hinges. Most were unreadable, their ink long since bled into gray smudges, but one map stood out. A thick, yellowed sheet tied with a piece of fraying twine, its edges curled and brittle. The title block read, Proposed Search Grid, 1972 in typewriter ink, but what caught my eye were the handwritten annotations in red. Arrows pointing to a place called Ship's Rest, along with phrases like, Do not approach, and They sing when the fog comes. My breath caught in my throat. The map detailed a twisting trail from the ranger station to a part of the forest I'd never seen before, a stretch of swampland ending at a cove marked with a skull-like symbol. I tried to laugh it off, telling myself it was some old ranger's joke, but the unease had already settled deep in my gut, and yet curiosity dug deeper than fear. If my car wouldn't start and help wasn't coming soon, what else could I do but follow the map? I set off, the map folded tightly in my pocket, boots crunching wet leaves as I crossed into the forest's oldest growth. The trees grew taller and thicker the farther I went, their gnarled branches forming a canopy that swallowed what little light remained. The air cooled sharply, smelling of earth and decaying leaves. A thin fog crept low along the ground, swirling around my feet as I stepped over moss-covered roots. Every now and then, the forest gave up a sound. A distant crack of a branch, a flutter of wings, a rustle that might have been wind but felt too deliberate. At one point, I came upon a series of small totems, sticks bound together with red string, arranged in crude, human-like shapes. They stood in silent clusters on either side of the trail, each one facing inward, as if marking the path. My pulse quickened, but the map guided me forward. Deeper in, the ground grew soggy, each step sinking slightly into dark, reeking mud. The path twisted through gnarled trees that bent low, their bark blackened as if charred. I had to duck under rotting branches and push aside curtains of hanging moss that felt like cold, wet hair. Occasionally, I'd see strange symbols carved into the trunks, circles intersected by jagged lines, triangles ringed with dots, each unfamiliar but deeply unsettling, as if they meant something dangerous. Hours seemed to pass. The sky overhead grew darker, though I couldn't tell if it was evening or simply the thickening fog. My flashlight's beam cut swaths of white in the mist, illuminating ghostly shapes that dissolved as I approached. Then I smelled it, salt, sharp and briny, mixed with the sickly sweet scent of decay. My heart pounded as the forest began to thin, the trees giving way to rocky, marshy ground. Beyond the final line of twisted pines, I saw it, an expanse of dark water stretching out like a black mirror under the low, suffocating clouds, a hidden cove. And there, rising from the shallows like the carcass of a giant beast, loomed the wreck of a ship. Its massive hull was split along one side, jagged timbers jutting outward like broken ribs. The mast hung at a crooked angle, tattered ropes swaying in the mist. Faint shapes flickered on the deck, indistinct in the swirling fog, too fleeting to make out, but enough to set every instinct screaming that I wasn't alone. The name on the bow, barely legible through layers of algae and barnacles, read, "The Marrow's Call." I waded into the shallows, boots filling with icy water, each step sending ripples across the still surface. The air felt thicker here, heavy with a silence that pressed against my ears, until every breath sounded deafening. The gangplank had rotted away long ago, so I pulled myself up using ropes hanging like limp snakes from the railings. The deck groaned under my weight, wood soft and splintered with age. The smell was overpowering, stale salt, mildew, and something far fouler, like rotting meat long submerged. I stepped carefully across the slanted deck, my flashlight cutting through the fog that rolled and curled like living things around my ankles. Barnacles encrusted every surface, black and glistening like empty eyes. A door hung open near the aft, swinging slowly on rusted hinges. As I approached, I heard a faint sound, a low hum, almost like a voice, singing far below deck. The air seemed to vibrate with it, a tune I couldn't place but felt wrong, dissonant, as if each note was out of tune with reality. I pressed on, drawn deeper into the ship. The corridors were tight and oppressive, walls slick with brine. I passed cabins whose doors had long since fallen from their frames, revealing bunks still holding the tattered remains of blankets and scattered belongings, boots crusted with salt, oil lamps shattered on the floor, a pocket watch frozen at 2:37. Each room felt like a moment frozen at the instant the crew abandoned it, or was taken. A logbook lay open on a small desk, in what must have been the crew's quarters, its pages swollen and warped, but still legible in places. The last entry read, "Fog thickens. Voices outside the hull. Captain says not to answer." I flipped through more pages, finding increasingly erratic handwriting. "They walk the decks at night. Voices are louder now. We are not alone in the fog." I looked up as a cold breeze passed through the corridor, carrying with it a faint voice whispering words I couldn't understand. My flashlight flickered. I spun around, shining the beam into the fog-filled hall behind me, but saw nothing. Only the slow drip of water from the beams overhead, landing in a pool at my feet. I pressed on, heart hammering, deeper into the ship's bowels, each step echoing through the narrow, rusted halls. The air grew colder, every breath condensing into pale mist before my face. My boots splashed through brackish water pooling in the lower corridors, the liquid dark and viscous, swirling with oily rainbows that shimmered under my flashlight. Overhead, the wood creaked, as if the entire hull were breathing around me. I passed doors chained shut with links blackened by age, each marked with symbols matching those carved in the forest. Circles, jagged lines, cryptic shapes that felt like a language meant to ward off something unseen. Every time I paused to listen, I heard faint, wet footsteps behind me. Never close, but never fading, always keeping perfect pace with mine. The humming grew louder the deeper I went, shifting in tone, rising and falling like a mournful chant. It felt like the sound came from the walls themselves, vibrating through the wood and metal, seeping into my bones. I came to a set of stairs leading down to the ship's hold. The steps were slick with algae, their railings warped and splintered. I descended slowly, each creak of the stairs sending shivers up my spine. The hold was cavernous, a vast belly of shadows filled with the skeletons of crates and barrels collapsed into heaps of rot. Chains swung lazily from the ceiling, clinking softly with the rocking of the ship even though the sea outside was perfectly still. The humming now carried words, hoarse, sibilant syllables that drifted through the darkness. Words I couldn't recognize, but which filled me with a growing certainty that they were meant for me. My light landed on something half buried in the sludge, a human skull, its eye sockets staring blankly, jaw locked open as if mid-scream. I stumbled back, nearly slipping in the muck, but forced myself to keep the beam steady. The skull was old, yellowed, cracked. Nearby, more bones protruded from the filth, rib cages twisted like driftwood, femurs stripped of flesh. The remains formed a rough circle, as if whoever they belonged to had gathered for some ritual they never finished. At the center of the circle lay a rusted brass compass, its needle spinning wildly despite the air being dead calm. I stepped closer, reaching out with shaking hands. The instant my fingers touched the compass, a deep groan rumbled through the hull, and every chain in the hold began to swing violently, crashing against the walls with a deafening clatter. My flashlight flickered, its beam flaring then dying, plunging me into smothering darkness. I heard footsteps splash rapidly through the water, dozens of them, moving with purpose, closing in from every direction. I froze, breath caught in my chest, heart beating so hard it felt like it might burst. Shapes shifted in the dark, faint outlines of figures sloshing through the water, their movements jerky and unnatural. I fumbled with the flashlight, smacking it against my palm until it flared back to life. The beam landed on a figure standing just yards away, a sailor in a rotted uniform, flesh pale and bloated, eyes empty and black. Its mouth moved slowly, whispering words that echoed the humming chant. Behind it, more figures emerged from the shadows, half-seen shapes wearing the tattered remnants of the ship's crew, each with eyes void of light. The temperature plummeted, my breath now forming thick clouds in the frigid air. I stumbled backward, nearly falling over a shattered crate. My foot splashed in deeper water, sending cold shock up my leg. The figures advanced, their feet making no sound now, only the soft hiss of water parting around them. The humming rose to a deafening pitch, a chorus of broken voices layered over one another, each speaking in that same alien tongue. I backed toward the stairs, slipping and scrambling, the compass still clutched in my shaking hand. As I reached the first step, something cold and solid clamped around my ankle. I looked down to see a skeletal hand gripping me with impossible strength, its bones crusted with barnacles and seaweed. I screamed, kicking frantically until it shattered under my boot with a sickening crunch. I bolted up the stairs, taking them two at a time, the chorus of whispers rising behind me. Bursting onto the deck, I found the fog had thickened to a white wall. Visibility reduced to mere feet. Shapes flitted in the mist, fleeting silhouettes moving impossibly fast around me. The ship itself groaned and shuddered, the mast swaying violently as if caught in a storm only it could feel. I dashed for the railing, gripping the slimy wood, and swung myself over the side. The fall felt endless, the cold air tearing past me, until I crashed into the frigid shallows below, the impact knocking the wind from my lungs. I surfaced gasping, eyes stinging with salt, ears ringing with the ship's low, mournful horn sounding somewhere overhead. The fog roiled on the water's surface, curling into shapes that almost looked like faces, mouths open in silent screams. I crawled through the shallows, every movement a struggle against the freezing, sucking mud. Behind me, the ship's bell began to toll, slow and deep, each peal vibrating through the water and rattling my bones. I dragged myself onto the rocky shore, collapsing among slick stones and tangled seaweed. My breath came in ragged sobs, eyes fixed on the looming shape of the ship fading into the fog. The bell tolled once more, then silence fell, so complete it felt as if the world itself was holding its breath. I staggered to my feet, soaked and shivering, the compass still clenched in my fist. I stumbled back into the forest, never looking over my shoulder, though I could feel eyes watching me from the shifting mist. The trail was a blur of dark trunks and hanging moss, the forest eerily silent now, every rustle of leaves amplified into thunder by my raw nerves. When I finally burst back into the clearing where the ranger station waited, the building looked smaller, more decrepit than before, as if it had aged decades during my absence. I glanced at the map, hoping to find some confirmation of what I'd just survived, but the line to Ship's Rest was gone, erased as if it had never been drawn. Only blank, yellowed paper remained, mocking me with its emptiness. That night, I huddled in the ranger station's corner, every sound outside sending fresh waves of terror through me. The fog pressed close against the cracked windows, shifting like a living thing. In the dead of night, I heard the low toll of the ship's bell echo across miles of forest, followed by the faintest, almost imperceptible hum of that same alien song drifting on the mist. I knew then that I hadn't escaped, not really. That whatever I'd found at the end of the map was now following me home, patient as the fog, waiting for the right moment to finish what it started. Sleep never came. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard the bell tolling again, echoing across the forest, or saw the pale, empty eyes of the crew shifting just beyond the fog. When dawn finally arrived, thin gray light seeped through the boarded windows of the ranger station, but it brought no comfort. The fog remained, thicker than before, swirling around the building in sluggish currents. Carrying with it faint whispers I tried to convince myself were tricks of a sleep-deprived mind. I packed what little I had and stepped outside, compass still clenched tight. My car was where I left it, but its doors were wide open, the interior soaked with salt water despite the forest being miles from the coast. Seaweed draped the seats, and a thick layer of sand coated the floor. The smell of brine was overpowering. I slammed the doors shut and decided to hike back to the main road, unwilling to spend another second near the ship's lingering presence. But the forest had changed overnight. The trail I remembered was gone, replaced by unfamiliar paths snaking off into dense stands of blackened trees. Every direction looked the same. No landmarks, no sign of the road, just endless corridors of twisted trunks and low-hanging fog. I tried retracing my steps, but the deeper I went, the stranger the forest became. Trees grew in impossible formations, their trunks bending into arches and spirals, roots braiding into walls that blocked my path. The air grew heavy with the scent of salt and rot, as if the forest itself had soaked up the ship's curse. Strange markings began to appear on the trees again, new symbols I hadn't seen before, freshly gouged into the bark, wet sap still oozing from the cuts. They formed patterns along the path, guiding me deeper into the woods rather than out. I began to hear the sound of waves crashing somewhere nearby, though I knew no ocean lay within dozens of miles. The fog carried the distant creak of a ship's timbers, the snap of sails in a wind that didn't exist. My steps quickened, panic rising with every crunch of dead leaves underfoot. Soon, the ground became soft and wet again, sucking at my boots. The air grew colder, breath frosting in front of me, even though the sun hung directly overhead, a dull white disk, barely illuminating the forest floor. I stumbled into a clearing I didn't recognize, dominated by a massive stone archway. It looked ancient, blocks of granite fused together with black moss crawling across every surface. The keystone bore a carving of a three-eyed skull, each eye socket drilled deep and perfectly round. Beneath the arch, the fog was so dense it looked solid, a wall of swirling white. I approached cautiously, heart hammering, ears straining for any sound beyond my ragged breathing. From within the fog came the low groan of a ship shifting its weight and the steady drip of water onto wood. I stepped through the arch, and the world changed in an instant. The forest vanished, replaced by a deck of rotting planks stretching endlessly in both directions. Massive sails loomed overhead, their canvas torn and flapping despite the dead air. The fog rolled across the deck, revealing rows of shadowy figures standing at attention, each clad in tattered uniforms, faces hidden beneath dark hoods. I tried to step back through the arch, but the stone gateway was gone, replaced by the ship's mast rising behind me. I turned in a slow circle, realization dawning with sick horror. I was back aboard the Merrow's Call, but this time there was no shore, no forest, just an endless sea of fog stretching to the horizon. The figures began to move in unison, raising skeletal hands toward the sky. A bell tolled overhead, slow and deliberate, each note reverberating through my bones. The humming returned, louder than before, vibrating the deck beneath my feet until I could feel it in my teeth. The compass in my pocket grew hot, burning against my thigh through layers of fabric. I ripped it out, but the needle spun faster than ever, whirring in a blur. A voice whispered from the fog, soft but clear, words slithering into my ears like icy knives. You were called. Now you belong. Shapes moved closer, cloaked figures parting the mist, hollow eyes flickering with dim light. I backed away until I hit the railing, old wood bending outward over a void of swirling fog. The humming rose to a fever pitch, the fog pulsing in time with the sound. I clenched the compass like a lifeline and threw myself over the side, expecting the cold shock of water. But instead of falling, I crashed through darkness, tumbling endlessly, my screams swallowed by the rushing wind. I landed hard on a forest floor, leaves exploding around me, branches snapping under my weight. The fog was gone. The sky overhead was clear and blue, birdsong drifting through the trees. The forest looked normal, even peaceful, sunlight dappling the ground in golden patches. I staggered to my feet, disoriented, compass still clutched in my white-knuckled grip. The needle had stopped spinning, pointing steadily north. For a moment, I almost believed I was safe, that I had escaped whatever curse had ensnared me. But then I noticed the tree trunks around me. Every one bore the same three-eyed skull carved deep into the bark, sap bleeding from the wounds like tears. A low hum drifted through the forest, so faint it could have been my imagination. But I knew better. I turned slowly, scanning the trees. Shadows moved between them, just out of reach, figures drifting like smoke, watching. I realized then that I had never left the ship at all, that the Marrow's call wasn't bound to the cove or the ocean. It carried its curse wherever I went, its fog following me like a faithful hound. The compass vibrated in my hand, the needle pulling me forward, deeper into the forest. With nowhere else to go, I began to walk, each step echoing like a drumbeat in the silent woods, the low hum growing louder with every footfall. I understood now that the map hadn't led me to the ship, it had delivered me to it, and no matter how far I ran, the call of the Marrow would always find me. I walked for what felt like hours, maybe days, the forest around me never changing, every tree marked by that same three-eyed skull, every gust of wind carrying the distant sound of a bell tolling somewhere beyond sight. Hunger gnawed at my stomach, thirst dried my throat until every swallow felt like sandpaper. But worse than the physical exhaustion was the creeping sense that time itself had unraveled. The sun never moved overhead. The shadows on the forest floor never shifted. I could have been walking in circles, but the compass needle pointed resolutely north, vibrating in my palm like a living thing. My thoughts frayed, memories blurring at the edges. I began to question what I'd seen, if there had ever been a ship, a map, a ranger station, or if I'd wandered into the forest days ago and simply lost my mind. But then the forest began to change again. The ground grew softer, each step squelching as black mud oozed up around my boots. The air thickened with mist rolling low along the forest floor, clinging to my legs like cold hands. The trees grew thinner, replaced by skeletal branches that clawed at the sky. The bell tolled again, closer this time, the sound resonating through the mud beneath my feet. Ahead, a shape loomed in the fog, a massive stone lighthouse, its paint long since peeled away, rust streaking the walls like dried blood. The light at its peak glowed faintly, casting a pale beam through the swirling mist. I stumbled toward it, drawn like a moth to a flame, each step harder than the last as the mud tried to pull me down. The lighthouse door hung ajar, groaning on its hinges with every shift of the wind. Inside, the air was damp and fetid, stinking of mold and salt. The spiral staircase rose into darkness, each metal step slick with moisture. I climbed slowly, legs trembling, the sound of my boots echoing up the hollow tower. The humming returned, filling the stairwell with its dissonant melody, each note vibrating through the iron walls. Shadows flitted along the walls, figures glimpsed just beyond the beam of my flashlight. Sometimes they appeared right beside me, white, eyeless faces framed by dark hoods, only to vanish the moment I turned my head. I reached the top of the tower, gasping for breath. The lantern room was a shattered ruin, glass panes cracked or missing entirely, the great lens fractured into jagged shards. A figure stood in the center of the room, cloaked in black, its face hidden in the shadow of a deep hood. It raised a skeletal hand and pointed out the broken window to the fog-shrouded forest below. My eyes followed the gesture, and through the drifting mist, I saw shapes moving among the trees, figures trudging in endless circles, heads bowed, arms hanging limp. They moved with jerky, puppet-like motions, their faces pale and waterlogged, eyes empty and black. One of them looked up, and despite the distance, I recognized my own face staring back at me. Panic seized me, a cold terror flooding every vein. I stumbled back, nearly toppling over the railing, but the figure in the room stepped closer, hand still outstretched. The humming rose to a crescendo, a discordant chorus of countless voices overlapping into a shrieking cacophony. The lighthouse shuddered, the floor beneath me cracking, chunks of stone plummeting into the fog below. I fell to my knees, covering my ears, but the sound only grew louder, piercing, as if the air itself was screaming. The compass burst in my hand, metal shards slicing my palm, a spray of blood misting the air. The broken needle hovered in place, pointing not north, but directly at the cloaked figure. Slowly it lowered its hood, revealing a face that was neither alive nor dead, skin pale and translucent, eyes like black pearls, mouth twisted into an eternal scream. The creature's lips moved in time with the humming, each word driving spikes of pain through my skull. It spoke in a language older than the forest, older than the sea, words that tasted of salt and rot. The fog outside surged into the lighthouse, curling around me like living tendrils, lifting me off the floor. I was pulled toward the figure, drawn inexorably closer as the fog filled my mouth, my nose, my lungs. The world faded into shifting gray, my body growing numb and weightless. Just before darkness claimed me, I felt the ship beneath my feet once more, the deck swaying gently, the bell tolling a final mournful note overhead. My eyes snapped open to find myself lying on the deck of the Marrow's Call. The sky above was a churning maelstrom of black clouds and flashing lightning, rain lashing the deck in sheets. The crew stood around me, a silent ring of rotted sailors, their eyes locked on mine. One stepped forward, the captain by his insignia, though his face was a ruined mask of decay. Years passed before anyone dared enter Thorne's Hollow again. The ranger station collapsed into a moss-choked ruin, its walls crumbling, roof caved under the weight of endless rain. The forest grew thicker, reclaiming the trail with tangled roots and brambles. But one autumn afternoon, a research team arrived. 2 men and a woman in orange vests, mapping lost corners of the forest for an environmental survey. They joked about ghost stories, laughed at the carved skulls on the trees, but their laughter faded the deeper they ventured. Near the center of the woods, they found a clearing littered with strange debris, an old compass shattered into pieces, shards of brass half buried in the dirt, rusted lanterns, and bones bleached white by years of sun and rain. But what held their attention was the map, still folded neatly in a leather case, the paper yellowed but perfectly preserved. The symbols on the map glistened faintly, as if drawn with fresh ink. At the center of the survey team, a technician named Sarah flipped the map open, her brow furrowed as she traced the trail to the place labeled Ship's Rest, voice trembling as she read the annotations. "Do not approach. They sing when the fog comes." A cold breeze swept the clearing, ruffling the edges of the map. The compass needle in Sarah's pocket, one she'd brought from home, began to spin slowly, a soft ticking noise audible in the hush of the forest. Her teammates exchanged uneasy glances as the light dimmed unnaturally, shadows thickening under the trees even though the sun still hung high above. One of them suggested they leave immediately, but Sarah's eyes were fixed on the forest's northern edge, where a dense curtain of fog was rolling in, swallowing the trees in a silent, hungry wave. She took a step forward, as if pulled by invisible strings, her boots crunching through dead leaves. A hollow bell tolled in the distance, once, twice, 3 times, and the forest fell deathly silent. A voice rose from the fog, low and melodic, singing words in that same alien tongue that had once haunted the narrator's dreams. The other 2 surveyors shouted for Sarah to stop, but she disappeared into the mist, the map fluttering in her hand like a dying bird. Moments later, the fog swept over the clearing, swallowing the men's panicked cries. When it lifted, there was no sign of the survey team, only the endless, whispering forest. The ranger station's ruins stood silent, its mossy stones cold and dark, watching as the forest grew quiet once more. And far away, hidden in a cove where the ocean met the mist, the Marrow's Call shifted slightly at anchor, its sails rippling in a wind that didn't touch the trees. On the deck, figures gathered in silent anticipation. Hollow eyes turned toward the forest, waiting for the next soul to answer the call. In a darkened room below deck, a new logbook lay open, a single line written in fresh ink. "She comes." The bell tolled again, deeper and more resonant than before, echoing through the fog, carrying its song to every dark corner of Thorne's Hollow and beyond.